Welcome to this informative session on Artemis program presented to you by Nehru Planetarium in collaboration with Brahmand, the Astronomy Club of PDEU Gandhinagar. It all started in 2017 when President Donald Trump initiated the program by allowing the private sector to tie up with NASA for the return of humans on the moon, followed up by the mission to the Mars or maybe beyond that. But as we know that humans have already touched the surface of the moon, right, in the last century. So why Artemis program is creating such a hype? For this, let's see the legacy which Apollo created. The Apollo program was a series of space missions undertaken by United States in 1960s and 1970s with the goal of landing humans on the moon and returning them back safely. The program was initiated by President John F. Kennedy in 1961. The first manned mission was Apollo 11, which landed on the moon on 20th of July 1969. Six manned missions were launched in total, and the last mission was Apollo 17, occurred in December 1972. The Apollo program was the major achievement for the NASA along with United States as a nation, and it remained one of the most significant event in the history of space exploration. The program was successful in achieving its goal of landing humans on the moon. It contributed significantly in the development of space technologies and the knowledge about the moon along with the solar system. The historic launch of Apollo 11 carried three astronauts towards the moon, and two of them touched the surface of the moon for the first time in the human's history, and the people around the globe followed their footsteps on their television. And with the Artemis mission, we can say that yes, the Apollo's legacy is the future of NASA. Hence, the return of humans on the moon will be made possible by Artemis program. And these are the things which NASA is trying to convey through their Artemis program's symbol. Like the blue crescent signifies the Earth, and the tip of A shows the preparation of humans for the upcoming future, for their sustainable presence in the solar system. And the red trajectory shows the new path which we followed for the moon in the new mission of Artemis. The Artemis program is led by NASA in collaboration with European Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency, and Canadian Space Agency. The major component used in the Artemis program are Space Launch System, Orion spacecraft, Human Landing System, and Lunar Gateway Space Station. NASA will conduct its first human landing since the Apollo program of 1972 with the Artemis 3. However, NASA's long-term aims are to achieve even more than that. They want to launch a future crewed expedition to Mars, utilizing the technologies and the science produced during the Artemis program. This will accomplish using the Orion spacecraft. The plan of Moon to Mars calls the construction of new space station in lunar orbit at some point in the future, right? And along with that, they will be needing a livable facility on the moon. And now, since we know the origin of Artemis program, let's see the recent developments made by NASA regarding the program. So recently, NASA launched the Artemis 1. The objective seems rather modest at the first glance. However, technically speaking, it was just a lunar orbit mission with no astronauts on the board. However, it was a stepping stone towards something much bigger. The Artemis 1 was launched on 16th of November 2022. The launch dates came after scrubbing two dates due to the faulty temperature readings on 29th of August and the hydrogen leakage during the countdown on 3rd of September 2022. And in this slide, we can see all the process related to the Artemis 1's launch, starting from the boosters and connecting them to the core stage and assembling it on a vehicle assembly building, which is the part of ground support system, and then using the launch pad for lifting of the rocket into the space, after which the trajectory of the Orion spacecraft was set, followed by the releasing of payload, which was Orion spacecraft in this Artemis 1 mission. Now, talking about Orion spacecraft, it was specifically designed to carry out astronauts into the space on future missions with an objective to make a base camp on the moon to lift off astronauts to Mars in upcoming decades. The spacecraft was carrying three human dummies, which were used to mimic the human bones, skins, and soft tissues. Along with that, they were having various kind of sensors, which were used to record the effect of space atmosphere on the human's body. After completing the journey of 25 days, 10 hours, and 53 minutes, it returned to the Earth's atmosphere and sputtered into the Pacific Ocean on 11th of December. It traveled for 6 days in the retrograde orbit of the moon. So these were the current developments regarding the Artemis program. Now let's see the upcoming missions in the Artemis series. Unlike Artemis 1, Artemis 2 will be a manned mission. Using the Space Launch System, Orion spacecraft, it will conduct the missions for 8 days, where the life support of the Orion will be checked. And in this mission, all the mission planning, navigation, new infrastructure of interfacing with the crews will be demonstrated. Though the crew has not yet been decided, but the mission will be having 4 astronauts and they will not land on the moon. The expected date of launch are in somewhere between 2024. In this mission, astronauts will perform various kind of system checks which will ensure that everything is ready for the deep space travel through the Orion spacecraft. It will only perform a single orbit around the moon and using the free return trajectory, it will come back to Earth. And these are the step-by-step sequence of Artemis 2. Firstly, it will launch from Space Center of NASA. Then the service module will deploy the solar array. This will be done at low orbit of the Earth. After which, reaching to the third point, interim cryogenic propulsion of the Orion will send it to the higher orbit of the Earth. At reaching the fourth stage, the apogee rise burn, the second burn will take place and send the Orion finally into the space. At the fifth point, interim cryogenic propulsion system will be separated from Orion spacecraft. And after reaching the sixth point, the service module of the spacecraft is fired to propel the Orion into the moon. After reaching the seventh point, a 4-day trip will start of the lunar orbit. And when it reached to the 8th point, the spacecraft will be at 7,500 kilometers away from the surface of the moon. This is known as lunar flyby. After reaching the 9th point, the spacecraft will start returning towards Earth. The service module and the crew module adapter will start separating at the point 10 and will keep burning till point 11. After that, the crew module will be splashed into the Pacific Ocean. And finally, we will be seeing humans flying around the moon and with their safe return. Then comes the Artemis 3. It will be a crewed lunar landing mission, and it will be the first mission in which a woman will be landing on the moon for the first time, along with a man of color who will be the first black man to walk on the moon. However, in this mission, only 2 astronauts will actually be landing on the moon, and the other 2 will remain in the spacecraft around the orbit of moon. It is planned to be done in 2025. However, the dates can be postponed. The mission will be dependent on the support of the private companies. Before the launching of the mission, the SpaceX has to place the human landing system in the moon's orbit. When Orion will reach the moon's orbit, it will be docked in the human landing system. After that, 2 astronauts will be transferred into the system for their safe landing on the moon. This landing will be near the South Pole because chances of finding water ice will be high there. Astronauts will explore the south pole of the moon and take the sample of water ice. It will be used by separating it and extracting the hydrogen, which can be used as fuel, and oxygen, which can be used as a breathable air. When the expedition is over, astronauts will use the human landing system to reach back to Orion, which was orbiting the moon, and using the Orion spacecraft, they will eventually come back to Earth. And in further missions, after this, they will be using the Gateway Space Station to land humans on the moon. It will be a small space station present in the orbit of the moon. There will be several companies to whom the contract will be given to make the gateway around the moon. With every new mission, the gateway will be expanding more and more, and it will be made in such a way that its orbit can be adjusted so that future missions can be used so that the future missions can use the gateway for their benefits. So, as we have gained a lot of knowledge about Artemis program, now let's see what all the major components were used in the Artemis program. First of all, the Orion spacecraft. NASA is building the human spacecraft, which is named after one of the largest constellation in the night sky, for the upcoming deep space missions, which will usher a new era of space exploration. Then comes the launch abort system. It will provide a safe way to escape in any case of failure in the spacecraft. It will help the humans to safely travel to the moon and eventually to the Mars in our quest to explore beyond the Earth's atmosphere. And it has been tested extensively by flying the entire system twice. Followed up by the crew module, which is also called the capsule of the Orion spacecraft. It will be providing the capacity of carrying 4 astronauts for up to 21 days of time period without docking to any other spacecraft. Various state-of-the-art technologies such as better life support, new avionics, power system, thermal protection will be used to support the crew during the landing, launching and the recovery of the Orion spacecraft. It will be also having a heat shield, which is designed specially to endure up to 5000 degree Fahrenheit of temperature during the return from the moon at a speed of 24,000 miles per hour. And beneath that, there comes the service module, which will be also called the powerhouse of the spacecraft. It is responsible for supplying electricity, propulsion, thermal control, air, and water to the Orion spacecraft. After the detachment of SLS, the service module will propel the spacecraft towards the moon and eventually return it back to the Earth. And when it re-enters the Earth's surface, it will also be detached. Now, for the spacecraft to reach to moon, we will be needing a powerful rocket. And for this, NASA has developed the Space Launch System. The SLS is the most powerful rocket ever built and qualitatively speaking way more powerful than the Saturn V, which was used during the Apollo program. And as of 2022, SLS is having the highest payload capacity along with the greatest liftoff thrust that any rocket can give. The development of SLS started in 2011. It was a replacement for the retired Space Shuttle, along with the cancelled projects of Ares 1 and Ares 5 vehicles. And with the height of 98-meter tall and weighing around 2,500 tons, this vehicle will help the Orion spacecraft to reach up to the speed of 36,000 kilometers per hour. And in this slide, we can see all the necessary components which were used in the previous Artemis mission and will be used in the upcoming Artemis program. We can see the launch abort system at the top, and beneath that there is the capsule of the Orion spacecraft, where humans will be staying for their journey. And below that there is the service module, the powerhouse of the spacecraft. And the giant yellow part is the core stage of the rocket, which will be connected to the solid rocket boosters which are connected on both the sides. Along with that, there is RS-25 engines in the set of 4. It will be connected below the core stage. Now, talking about the core stage, it is the first stage of the rocket which is powered by one central core stage, and together with the solid rocket boosters, the core stage is responsible for propelling the upper stage along with the payload out of the atmosphere and into the space. The core stage provides approximately 25% of the liftoff thrust during the launch. Then comes the solid rocket boosters. SLS will be using two 5-segmented solid rocket boosters. They possess an additional center segment, new avionics, lighter insulation, but will be lacking parachute recovery system. The 5-segmented boosters will not be recovered after their first usage. Then comes the upper stage. It will be including the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, as discussed earlier, which will be responsible for an orbital insertion followed by the translunar injection burn to send the Orion towards the moon. Now, coming to the final part of the rocket, which is RS-25 engines. And according to NASA, these are the most efficient engines ever built. Along with the boosters, it will be sending the space launch system into the orbit at a speed of 27,000 kilometers per hour. They will be fired for up to 8 minutes. And a fun fact is that they can provide 9 lakh kg of thrust, which is approximately equal to 100 elephants. Now that Orion has entered the orbit of the moon, let's see how human landing will be made possible by NASA. With the help of human landing system, which is a crucial part of Artemis program, it will convey the astronauts from the lunar gateway station to the surface of the moon, sustain them there for a particular period of time, and eventually will return them back to the gateway space station. In April 2020, NASA selected three companies, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Dynatic, to develop the human landing system. And for such a complex mission to be executed, NASA will be needing a ground support system, for which they have developed and established all the facilities to operate the launch during the Artemis program. It will be including the exploration ground system, facilities for Orion and SLS, the crawler, a mobile launcher, launch pad, the Orion recovery system, which will be used to recover the Orion when it re-enters the Earth, and vehicle assembling building. And these are the pictures taken at the ground support system, like checking the RS-25 engines, as you can see in the first image, and collecting the Orion spacecraft, which is the third image. Now, since we know the upcoming missions of NASA, let's see their ultimate goal, like what they are trying to achieve. With increased demand of moon's access, NASA is exploring the technologies to provide an unprecedented human presence on the moon. It can be in the form of humans directly or through robots. With each successive voyage, astronauts will be able to explore and analyze more parts of the moon than ever before. The idea of the base camp features a lunar cabin, a rover, and a mobile home, which will be used by astronauts to live and work on the moon simultaneously. The long-term goal of the initiative includes the establishment of a permanent outpost on the moon and facilitating the human expedition to the Mars. Early flights will entail brief stay on the moon, but as the base camp develops, the goal is to allow people to spend up to 2 months on the surface of the moon. And in 2025, when NASA will launch the Artemis 3, it will be the first time when most of the people will witness the human walking on another planetary body beyond the recorded footage of Apollo program. With this, NASA's aim is to build and establish the infrastructure for both robots and human explorers on the moon. Now, let's see all the components which were proposed by NASA for the development of Artemis Base Camp. It will be consisting of one permanent outpost, two transportation system, and one constant source of power supply. First of all, the foundation surface habitat. This lunar outpost will serve as a jumping off station for an in-depth exploration of the moon. This will be non-mobile and designed for a short-term stay. It will be pressurized and will have the integrated life support system for the astronauts to live there properly. Then, for the mobility of astronauts, for their exploration, NASA has proposed two lunar surface transportation system. The first one is LTV, which is Lunar Terrain Vehicle, and the second one is the Habitable Mobility Platform, which will act like both home and office for the astronauts. Then comes the Lunar Terrain Vehicle. The LTV is the unpressurized utility vehicle which will be used by the astronauts to transport in and around the base camp. It will be having the capacity of carrying two astronauts in their space suits, which are called Exploration Extravehicular Mobility Units. In addition to the LTV, A pressurized rover will expand the capability of lunar exploration at a great extent. This will provide more comfort to work while exploring the larger areas which are still under the research. And after the completion of the infrastructure, this is what NASA this is what we will be seeing. Using the base camp and the transportation system, NASA's astronauts will extract the resources found on the moon while exploring the larger surface areas of the moon. And for powering up the base camp and the vehicle, a constant supply of energy will be required, which is pretty hard to find on the moon. For this, NASA is supporting the development of vertical solar array that will autonomously deploy up to the 32 feet high, and it will also have the ability of relocation if necessary. So this was the ultimate goal of NASA. Now let's see the bigger picture, like what they are trying to portray with their program. The bigger picture is that through this mission, NASA's aim is to push the boundaries of what is possible within the human reach and pave a way for a sustainable and an enduring presence of humans on the moon. Artemis mission will help us to colonize the moon, and if we are able to successfully colonize, then our next step will be reaching to the Mars. And in our long journeys like mission to Mars or maybe beyond that, the moon will be acting like a resting ground where we can refuel our rockets and take the important life support items from the lunar base camp. The Apollo program has been a driver of innovation in many technologies, including the advances in the development of cordless power tool, fireproof materials, heart monitors for the astronauts, solar panels for the constant supply of energy, digital imaging, and the usage of liquid methane as a fuel. The Artemis program can also be such another driver of innovation. So, we can conclude the whole session by these four words, which are man on the moon. We can summarize the ambitious project of NASA with this. And I would also like to highlight that India is not behind in the new era of space exploration. Recently, India's first human space flight was announced under the Gaganyaan program, and the project aim is to take three astronauts into the orbit of moon for 5 to 7 days before returning them back to earth safely. And in 2018, Prime Minister Narendra Modi referenced the Gaganyaan project during their Republic Day speech and said that on 75th Independence date, India will be celebrating along with the success of Gaganyaan program. However, due to a number of reasons like the lockdown in 2020, the mission has been postponed for the and the launch dates will be in the fourth quarter of 2024. And this is a beautiful video in which we can see all the major events related to the space sector in the last century, like starting from the Sputnik 1, followed by the mission of America, then sending the first human into the space by the USSR in 1969. And then many interesting missions came, and eventually the last missions were of Voyagers, and we can see the images which were sent by the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 of the outer planetary parts. And in the end, I would like to say that keep exploring because that's in our human nature. Thank you.